Alright, this is part 2 of my Korg Minilogue overview and review video. Follow up to the first one. So, in this video, I'm just going to get started with some patches, because the number one thing that people were asking about is hearing more sounds. So, first thing I'm going to do is play a few patches I've made in the past week, and then I'm going to address a couple mistakes, make some corrections from what I said in the first video. Having to do with editing gate length and the ability to do latching, and also with external audio, processing external audio. So I'll get into that after the patches, and then I'll end with addressing a couple things I didn't get to in the first video. So with that, we're asking about more vintage 70s or 80s sounds, so I decided to try to emulate a pretty iconic synth patch. It's from the soundtrack to one of my favorite movies, a science fiction movie. You should recognize it if you're into synthesizers, so here's my take. People were asking about pads, so this is my favorite pad sound that I've come up with. I'll do it first without the reverb, and then I'll add the reverb in. So here's without the reverb. And that's using the onboard delay. I can cut that out as well. Here's without the delay. And then with the reverb and the onboard delay. Alright, and someone was asking about Boards of Canada type sounds, so here's a pad I made that was going for that type of sound. And in this one, I'm playing the sequence, but there's no notes in it, so I'm using the motion sequencing to get some more automation going. Here's another grittier pad. All right, and here's a sequence using the Duophonic mode. I really like Duo because you can detune it, but you also, as opposed to unison, you can have notes that overlap. I really wish that instead of the chord inversions in Poly, they had just included detune instead, because I don't really use the voice mode effect in Poly as much. Whereas having some detune spread between the polyphonic voices sounds really good. So I've been using Duo a lot for that kind of stuff. So here's a little example of that. This is with some reverb and delay. All right, and then I've also just been exploring. There's lots of ways to make sort of bizarre soundscape drones with this. So some of these patches are just going to be some sequences showing off kind of what happens when you're using the ring mod and cross mod, or self-oscillating the filter and getting some interesting sort of inharmonic tones. Here's a percussive sequence using the noise. All right, here's a patch that kind of sounds like an accordion that comes out of using some of the cross mod and ring mod and other ways of getting some more complex wave shaping going on. All right, and here's a patch where I have some stepped automation going from the motion sequencing, which almost gets you into some sample and hold territory, but obviously it isn't random, but it's sort of what I would do with a sample and hold typically. Here's another sort of inharmonic, noisy drone patch that also has a sort of a sample and hold type sound on the filter cutoff, which is just stepped modulation in the motion sequencing. And this is without any effects, and then I'll add the effects in after a second. And with effects. And here's a sort of an inharmonic drony pad sound. That's just using the onboard delay. So here's with a little reverb as well. And one of the sounds I've been trying to coax out of this thing, but not 100% satisfied with, is sort of acid sounds. I think there's probably some in the factory presets. I recall in some of the other promo videos and demo videos hearing some sort of 303-ish sounding sequences. I haven't had the best of luck with it. I don't think this is the best filter for that type of stuff, but I've gotten some pretty decent sounds, especially after I figured out how to use the sequencer a little better and how to implement ties and work with the portamento a little better. So here's one that's a sort of not exactly acid, just I called it Dubber's acid. So anyway. And then here's a little more straightforward acid patch. All right, here's a drone patch that's using a lot of modulation. I've got all four lanes of motion sequencing going. So I'll play this with a little reverb and delay. Here's a patch using the delay voice mode. This is an interesting voice mode. This and the sidechain I don't think I've ever seen before on any synthesizer as one of the ways of distributing the voices. So the way it works is that it's like a MIDI delay, so it's not an audio delay. It delays the notes and spreads them across the different voices. And then the voice depth sets the clock division of that delay. So that's the one thing I actually don't like about it. I think it's a really interesting mode, but I wish that it wasn't necessarily clocked. Like the way it functions is it's sort of like using a clock audio delay, like a synced tap tempo delay or something, where you get clock divisions. I really wish instead it was just completely free and you could just vary the phase, almost like just adjusting MIDI notes, because I really think that would open up the possibility of doing like Steve Reich style phasing, like intentional, using the motion sequencing to bring things in and out of phase. I think that would sound really cool. So Korg, if you're listening and you can do that, please implement that. If not in this synth, if you do another synth with a similar voice mode with a delay, find a way to do it where you can just vary the phase. That would be awesome. So I have 2 patches using the delay mode. Here's the first one. And this is without any external effects at first, and then I'll bring them in. And now with reverb and delay. Alright, and then here's another one using the delay mode. And I'll play it first dry and then with the effects. And obviously that's using the onboard delay. And here's with some reverb. This is another patch similar to what I did in the first video using the filter as an oscillator. And I'm FMing it from the LFO. And it has a nice mellow sound. It kind of reminded me of some of the early Harold Budd and Brian Eno stuff, like The Pearl, which is one of my all-time favorite records. So this patch is called Bud, and it's for you, Harold. Here's a drone pad in the Duophonic mode that's using the onboard delay with a really short time and high feedback. So I'll play it dry and then I'll add a little reverb. Alright, here's my attempt at a sort of Prophet 5 style brass patch. Obviously it doesn't sound that good, but it's, you know, it's a decent brass patch on the Minilogue. So I'll do it dry and then I'll add some reverb. Alright, and here's a Polyphonic Patch using the ring mod that I thought sounded pretty good. And with a little reverb and delay. Alright, and here's a sequence using the sync, the oscillator sync, and then I'm modulating the VCO1, the octave, so it gets some interesting tone. So I'll play it dry and then with the effect. Alright, and here's an Arpeggiator Patch where I've got some octave motion sequencing as well, and then I'm modulating the cross mod depth over time to get a sort of detuned sound in the arp. I'll play it dry and then I'll bring in the effects after a second. Alright, and now I'm going to get into some of the corrections from my first video. As I said in the first video, I had only had the Minilogue for a day, so I didn't know everything about the functionality, and while there is a manual, some stuff is a little vague, so I wasn't exactly sure how everything was implemented at the time I did the first video, so I got a couple things wrong, so I'll correct them in this video, and then also edit the notes on the first video so there's not any confusion. So one of the things I was incorrect about, and I'm really happy that I was wrong because I thought it was a real shortcoming, is the way that the audio in works. So if you'll recall, when I did the demonstration of the audio in with the Volca, I said that I had to do an arpeggio because I wanted to have some kind of hold because I said that the external audio wouldn't come through unless you were holding down the keys. And it is true that you have to open the VCA in some way in order to hear the audio. And so you could do a latch in the sequence to do that. But I thought that it was just kind of like a gate on, gate off, and I wasn't hearing the external audio in the release part of after you press the key. But that's because I tested it with my microbrute, and I stupidly had it set on gate. Anyone who knows the Arpeggiator microbrute has a setting for the VCA to be either controlled by the envelope or by the gate. And so with a gate, it's just note on, note off. So that was the microbrute and not the Minilogue. So as I'll demonstrate, this is the microbrute being controlled by the MIDI out from the Minilogue, going into the Minilogue, and that's the envelope on the Minilogue, the release. So the note will play normally, and that way you can bring in another synth and add an additional oscillator. I have the microbrute set to low note priority, so when I'm doing polyphonic stuff with the Minilogue voices will be in poly, but the microbrute obviously is mono, and it'll play the bass line basically. So I have a patch here. It's a sequence that's using the microbrute and all the voices of the Minilogue. I think it sounds really good. So I'll start out just playing the microbrute, and then I'll bring in the Minilogue voices, and then I'll add some effects. So here it goes. And then here, if I take the microbrute out, you'll hear the difference. So that's just the Minilogue. Sounds good, but it's a little thin. So when you bring in the sub oscillator and the saw from the microbrute, it sounds a lot more lush to my ears. So yeah, the Minilogue works much better with external audio than I thought. It properly goes through the VCA with the amplitude envelope affecting it. So if you get a Minilogue and you have any other kind of mono synths, small form factor mono synth would be great, like a microbrute, Bass Station 2, anybody with an MS-20 Mini or anything like that. The new Korg Arp Odyssey, obviously vintage, anything that has MIDI, but a vintage synth would sound great too if you have that. So any kind of mono synth I think would be a great way to add, especially if it has a way to set the note priority to add a bass line sound in there and just have it be part of the Minilogue sequence. So yeah, I'm really happy that actually was better than I thought. I thought it was a weird implementation, and it was just because I had mistakenly set the microbrute up incorrectly. So anyway, that's one correction. All right, and then here's two more sequences using the Zaquencer, like the first patch, the opening patch from the first video. So the great thing about the Zach Audio Zaquencer firmware for the BCR 2000 is that in addition to being able to sequence notes, do just regular MIDI note sequencing, you can sequence MIDI CCs. So that's like having automation from a DAW or something, except it's more of a hardware style sequencer. So Um, the Minilogue has pretty good MIDI implementation in terms of CCs. I mean, pretty much every knob on the front panel, and maybe I think some of the stuff that's buried in the menu, but I think it's limited how that stuff can be modulated. But anything that has a knob or a switch, you can modulate with an external CC the exact way that you'd modulate it live. So, if it's a stepped thing like a switch, then it's just like an on-off. But if it's a knob with a 1,000 per points or whatever, obviously that's you don't get all of those with just the typical 120 or whatever CC steps, but you can get some interesting modulations going. So I've got 2 patches where I'm doing some modulations that I couldn't do really well with the Minilogue, and it's just with its own LFOs and LFO and motion sequencing. So this first patch is like an FM patch, FMing the filter, which is self-oscillating, so it's a sine wave, and then I've got the sequencer controlling the rate and the intensity of the LFO. So I was actually able to kind of tune in some good sounding intervals. Of course, this isn't linear FM, it's exponential, and it's a filter. So, that wasn't meant to be an LFO or a VCO. So, it's a little, dissonant, but I think it sounds pretty cool. It's sort of like a West Coast patch, which you typically can't do with a synth like the Minilogue, but having an external modulation source allows you to do some weirder stuff. So here, check this out. And here's a little reverb. All right, so this one, what's going on is some detuning of the oscillators against each other. You can use MIDI CCs to affect the fine tune of the oscillators, which is great. So I have a random pattern going on that CC sequence, so I'm getting some interesting detune over time that would be not possible with the onboard modulation of the Minilogue. So I'll play it dry and then add the effects in. So that's just some of the sounds you can get out of using some external MIDI controllers to affect the sound. Obviously, if you hooked it up to your DAW, you could do different types of automation. But I just did it with the sequencer because I like a kind of hands-on way of doing that. But in any DAW, you could. It's my cat. In any DAW, you could go in and draw automations or do anything if you have more complex ways of doing MIDI modulation. All the parameters that you can motion sequence natively, you could be modulating externally. So that's definitely a great feature. All right, and some people in the comments had asked about envelopes clicking. There's been some talk going around saying that the envelopes in the Minilogue are clicky. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely times when you get clicks. I've never played a synth where, you know, you couldn't find some settings that are going to have clicky envelopes. Some are worse than others, obviously. Some people design their VCAs and their envelope shapes to try to avoid that. I know there's like ways of trying to compensate for that digitally. But based on the type of waveform you have and the shape of an envelope, you will get a click. Anyone who's ever edited any audio, if you know anything about zero crossing and like, you know, where you slice a waveform, if you're editing a sample or whatever, you're going to get a click or a pop, and then there's ways of trying to smooth that. So, you know, in terms of just with an analog synthesizer, if you have like a smoother like triangle or a sine wave, and then a certain envelope shape that doesn't have a smooth attack or release, you'll get a click. I've noticed on here sometimes, I think the voice stealing, there might be clicks, like if you play too many notes in poly, and so all the notes you have get cut off by the next, depending on the envelope shape, you'll get some clicks. So I'll just play around with a completely basic patch without any kind of modulation and adjust the envelope, and you'll hear where there's clicks and there aren't. So like with a sine or with a saw wave, even with just straight sustain and no attack, no release, I don't hear a click because it's a saw wave. Change it to triangle, however, there's a click on the attack, right? And as you can see from the oscilloscope, I mean, it's kind of small, I don't know if you can see it, but that's because it's going from completely quiet to completely on when it's a triangle. So you're going to get a click. If you add a little release, you don't get a click. So, I mean, I don't think that that's a problem. If you're someone who's like really anal about this stuff, you've probably heard patches that I've demonstrated that I think sound good, and you thought, oh God, clicks, it's trash. This synth is terrible. He's terrible. I hate this video. And that's fine, you know, then you don't have to listen to this. You don't have to buy this. And you can have a click-free existence. But on my end, I don't really care. I feel like it's fine. I haven't like really been working on a patch where I had something a specific way and it had to be that way, but then there were these awful clicks ruining it. That's hasn't been my experience. So yes, there are times when the envelopes click. Do I think that that's like a problem or a flaw in the design? No. Do I understand where people are coming from and not wanting clicks? Of course. Do I think there's other synths that are better about it for a variety of reasons having to do with envelope shape, VCA, character, etc.? Obviously, yeah. But I don't think it's like a major handicap or a problem. You know, I stand by the sounds I've been demonstrating. I think they sound fine, and if there are audible clicks, to me, depending on the type of patch, it's not a big problem. So that's my take on the envelope clicking. All right, and I'm just going to say a little more about the envelopes in general. Some people had asked how snappy and short they can go and how long, you know, long release, long attack times. So I'll show that. And in my opinion, it's just about in the middle. It's average. Like, there's definitely snappier envelopes I've heard, and there's definitely much longer, you know, smoother envelopes better for ambient type tones. But I think that they definitely get the job done. I wish that you could do even longer attack and release times, and I wish that, you know, you could control a little bit more about the shape. But for a basic, you know, analog synthesizer, I think these are good. It's not like super advanced where you're getting, you know, choose between the type of curve, logarithmic, linear, exponential, or anything like that. They don't give you that kind of control, but for what it is, for a basic ADSR, I think it works pretty well. So. So with the filter envelope, maybe you can get a sense of if it's snappy or not. Versus like with a really long release, this is like long release, long attack, swell type of sound. So that's as slow as it'll go. And you can get a bit more of a feel for the envelopes with a sequence going. And so I'll use this opportunity to also say a bit about what I got wrong about the sequencer the first time. And then once I get a sequence going, we can, I'll tweak the envelope a bit and you can hear a bit more of the range. So one of the things that I got wrong in the first video is how to edit the gate time. There's a setting that I was adjusting, which is like in the sequencer menu. So that's where you go to edit mode, sequence edit, and then it has the default gate time. But that doesn't affect the things you've already recorded. That sets a default for anything you're going to record after that for this patch, this program. But to actually adjust the gates, all you do is you to actually adjust the gates, all you do is go to this 1 through 8, 9 through 16 button, and then if you tap on the step that you want to edit, you see the note. There's 2 pages for each step. There's the note, it tells you what note you recorded, and then if you tap it again, you get the gate time. So then you can adjust the gates for each individual note. So there isn't like a quick way to do it for all of them that I've figured out, or any way to like randomize or modulate the gate times, but you can go through each one and change them. So in terms of the latch behavior, you can go all the way up past 100, and then it says gate time tie, and then that way you actually get a hold for that note. So if I wanted to change, also if you hold shift when you're editing, and then you turn the main program value, you can set the length of the overall sequence. So if I turn it to 1 and I have the time set to tie, then it's a hold. So if I want to do a hold to drone, you can do it, and it's actually very easy. So that's another thing I was wrong about in the first video. So then if I want to go back and have a longer sequence, so then I have an 8-step sequence, and I can adjust the gate time for all of them. So say I wanted to go to really short gates. And then maybe I'll have one that's like a tie. And then if I adjust the envelope now, you can hear a bit more of the character of the envelope. And then with the portamento set to only play when it's legato, if you do a sequence and you've got some short staccato notes and then you use other notes with ties, then you'll get glide only on the notes with the ties. So it's a nice way to add portamento only to certain notes instead of on, global glide setting. Switch over to mono and then speed it up a little bit. So yeah, that's, you know, adjusting the gate times, messing with the envelope, get some different types of sequences going. Alright, so that about wraps it up for this follow-up video. I'll probably do some more videos in the future. I don't think I'm going to do anything this long. So thanks to everybody who watched the first video. I was amazed. I've never had this much attention for any video I've done. I know it's not about me, it's about this, but that's okay. Yeah, I was glad to be able to get one early and make a video and share it with people. So hopefully that can help you figure out if this is the synth that you want to pick up, or if you're not interested in it. Like people said, you know, infomercials where salesmen are telling you this is the greatest synth ever made aren't really actually helpful for musicians. And, you know, I really do respect Korg, and I like this synth a lot, but I'm not making this video to kiss their ass. There's definitely things I think that are not good about it. There's things that I think are amazing about it. I think in the current market, it was a brilliant decision. It fits in a niche where there's really no competition. For someone like me who didn't have another analog poly synth, it was an obvious choice. You know, for me, if I want poly sounds, I've either been using software or using my iPad apps, or I have a Casio CZ101, and those are all fine, but I've been really looking for an analog poly synth, and, you know, considering getting one of the lower end DCO polys from the 80s, which some of them, you know, you have to pay a lot for, but some of them, if they're DCOs or if they're hybrid with digital oscillators or samples or whatever, and analog filters, you know, there's some that you can get for only a few $100, or around this price, either a little less or a little more. And I had considered getting one of those. I'm thinking like, you know, the low-end Korg stuff, Poly 61 or whatever, or you know, honestly, I think this is comparable to like the Alpha Junos or even the JX series, which go for a lot more than this. And, you know, there's going to be people who really prefer that sound, that like late analog Roland DCO sound to this. And there's reasons why you would prefer that. But for me, the knob per function type of interface, pretty much knob per function, I mean, there is a menu, but the fact that you can adjust most of the parameters without needing an external controller, just the immediacy of it is what makes this such a great synth. It's not the sound. I do like the sound, but as people pointed out, it's not the warmest synth. So even though this has VCOs and an analog filter, if you compare it to like DCO synths, I don't think it sounds that different. Like, it has some character that's a little different, and the way that it drifts if you don't tune it and stuff. I'm sure I'll find more things about it that I think are really distinct. But, you know, the point of this synth is not that it's the warmest, most vintage sounding synth. It's a very modern analog synth. It's not going to compete with, you know, your classic vintage poly synths that go for, you know, 5 to 10 times the price. But I think it really does compete with some of these lower end synths, you know, from the 80s that or early 90s that don't have good interfaces. It's a real bitch to edit stuff like that, and like, I don't need an external editor for this. It's really easy to make patches. And then compared to like my modular or a microbrute, I can actually make patches and save them. That's like one of the things I really like about it. And, you know, and I think the sound is really unique and really good for what it is. It is kind of cold at times, which I think can be cool, you know. I think some of the patches I've demonstrated have a little bit more warmth to them based on how I had things set with the filter. Just like the microbrute, which is a synth that has a bit of a bad reputation for sounding kind of harsh, or thin, or noisy, or whatever people don't like about it. Anyone who's spent time with one and grown to like it can tell you that it really rewards subtle patching, and, you know, not completely opening the filter and not having modulation amounts cranked and not having the oscillators cranked. And, when you kind of roll things back a bit, you can get more subtle, warm, kind of vintage sounds out of the microbrute. And the same is true of the Minilogue. I really think that, the patches that I did that I said I thought were a little more vintage sounding, or, the pad sounds, they really benefited from, a little restraint. Korg lets you get crazy with the modulation, but that doesn't mean you have to. And I think it sounds good. If you're going for more classic sounds, if you keep things, toned down a bit, and then just the actual tone of the oscillators and the filter can really come through, and then you throw that into some effects, and you can get a really, really nice tone for what you're trying to do. In terms of the filter, I will say a couple people commented they didn't like it, and I'm not crazy about it. I think it works well for poly. You don't necessarily like the filter that you want in your mono synth, you may not want in your poly. I've definitely made patches where I really like the way the filter was sounding, but I've also been working on patches where I keep tweaking it and I'm like, not satisfied. And there's certain types of sounds that I would do on like an MS-20, for example, or even the microbrute, that I just wouldn't do here because I don't actually like the character of the resonance that much. But it's unique. It has its own character. And, when you run external audio through, like I did in the first demo, and then have a key tracking with polyphonic chord or sequence going, you get some really cool sounds. So I'm definitely going to experiment more with that. And as an oscillator, I love the filter. I really, I haven't ever had an analog poly, where I could oscillate the filter and play polyphonically with it. And I really think it sounds lovely. I think my favorite patch that I demonstrated was probably that Harold Budd inspired kind of electric piano patch. And I'll probably be doing a lot more of that type of stuff in my recordings and my actual tracks and live performance, So yeah, that's about it. All in all, like I said, I think it's a great synth for what it is. It's not a be-all, end-all synth. If you're looking to buy one synth and have it make every possible sound you'd ever want, I don't think that exists. To be honest, I don't think that there's any of those big workstations. Personally, I wouldn't want that. If that's for you, then save your money and get, a couple $1,000 workstation. If you're looking for, a powerhouse analog polysynth, save your money and get a Prophet 6 or the new OB6 or something like this, or Modal Electronics. But if this is your budget, or you're just looking for another interesting, instrument with a small footprint to add to like a collection where you're only going to use it for certain types of sounds and not rely on it for everything, then I'd highly recommend it. For me, like I said, I didn't have an analog poly, so I'm really glad that I waited and I got this instead of something that could potentially have like broken voice chips or a faulty battery or whatever. You get what you pay for in the used market, and you get a lot worse than you pay for a lot of the time. And with this, I really, I feel like this is a stable, clean, modern, just really well-designed instrument, and I do really like the sound of it. And it's really been fun playing it and demonstrating it for all you. So I hope, people got something out of this video as well as the first video. And if you like the sounds and like what I'm doing, please like the video and subscribe. And as I said, I'll be posting more Minilogue videos if I come up with interesting patches or techniques, trying to interface it with my modular, sequencing it from different things. Nothing this long, but I'll probably post some shorter videos. So if you want to keep up with that, definitely subscribe to my page. And thanks again for watching. All right.